kids. She loved being a mom. She's responsible for everything.
Until she found the right partner.
This police officer just sweeps her off her feet. It was an instant chemistry.
This seems to be the one. She was anticipating being with this man.
But it wasn't meant to be.
There was a single gunshot wound to her head. She had blood all over her.
Who would do this to her?
The search for answers uncovers a scandalous secret.
The instant they find out, that changes things.
A lot of people were outraged.
There seems to be some sort of pattern.
I don't think it's coincidental.
And the final outcome could tear the town apart.
There were tensions between the Black community and police. This was the summer George Floyd had been murdered.
People started to demand justice, accountability.
Home to Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi's main campus.
Oxford has about 25,000 people. Most of those are students, so it's a vibrant community.
It's a nice college town. Downtown is beautiful, but it's also very small, so everybody knows everybody.
It's a fun atmosphere, very close-knit community.
Although there was a time when Oxford was sharply divided. In 1962, when James Meredith became the first African American to attend Ole Miss, a mob of white supremacists descended on campus.
2 people died in the rioting before federal troops were able to restore order.
They've come leaps and bounds from that.
Race relations have really gotten better from what they were 50, 60 years ago.
But one tragic crime will reveal the tensions that still simmer beneath the surface. It's around 2 in the afternoon when Dominique Clayton's 8-year-old son returns from a weekend away.
He and his brothers had just gotten back from staying with his uncle on Friday and Saturday.
He's ready to tell his mom about, everything that had happened while he was away.
But moments after he enters his mother's room, he runs back out the front door to find his grandmother.
Grandma! He was clearly upset by something.
What's wrong, baby? It's Mom.
She's trying to figure out what's going on.
Eventually, the little boy manages to give his grandmother the terrible news.
He's saying, Mom's not waking up. And I see blood.
Mom? 32-year-old Dominique Clayton's world revolved around her 4 children.
She was a doting mother.
She loved her kids.
I made your favorites. Chicken.
But as much love as she had to give, things hadn't worked out in the long term with any of their fathers.
A single mother of 4 has the world on her shoulders. She's responsible for everything.
She cared for those children and tried to provide for them to the best of her ability.
You definitely need to work on your homework today, girl.
She kept a roof over their head, kept them fed, well clothed.
Hi, babies.
Dominique also had tremendous support from her family.
Anybody need some help?
Because she was so busy trying to work, her family really was committed to helping her.
Her mother lived right next door to her. That was just the support that she needed. They were a close-knit family, and she was a family-oriented person, and it definitely takes a village.
Having her mom around also meant that Dominique was able to sometimes enjoy life as a young single woman.
She's at the age where you want love, you want attention, you want affection.
It's easy to lose yourself as a woman getting wrapped up in family life.
She was really trying to make the most out of her life.
Which, in Oxford, meant hanging out at one of the many bars and restaurants lining the city's charming Courthouse Square.
The square is the place to be. Everyone goes to the square.
I'm so glad my mom got the kid.
It was at the square one night in 2018 that Dominique met Matthew Kenny.
Somebody come to take this spot? Could I hop in?
Of course, no, voluntarily.
The moment she met Matthew, it was an instant chemistry.
He couldn't resist her easygoing spirit.
She was bubbly. She was the life of the party.
There's no way you're here alone.
Dominique was smitten to have that attention.
That sparked something in her, made her feel wanted and desired.
She's usually caring for her children, so this really felt good to her.
As it turned out, Matthew knew all about trying to squeeze in a social life around a busy schedule.
He was a police officer with the city of Oxford.
He was a member of the department's mounted patrol unit.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. That's not a problem.
No, not at all.
She was a person that admired cops. She wanted to be a law enforcement herself.
So to meet someone who was doing that very thing attracted her to him.
Within days of that first meeting, the cop and the single mom were a couple.
It didn't take long for things to get serious between them.
They were spending time together when they could.
Which wasn't always easy, given their busy schedules.
He would come over after his shift when the kids were asleep.
It was the easiest way for them to have some time alone.
You ever get that?
Matthew also found ways to make life a little easier for Dominique and her kids.
I got a couple surprises for you. I've been waiting to do it all day, though, so...
Really?
Close your eyes.
He was helping pay her rent. He even bought her a car.
Open.
And he was helping her save up for a home.
I'm sure that was, a big help for her.
What is that?
And it seemed like the next step was only a matter of time.
Matthew had, in fact, given Dominique a ring.
Look, it's not an engagement ring, but I just want you to know that I'm really serious about us.
This seems to be the one.
It didn't seem like she was going to be a single mother for much longer at all.
Of course.
But now, Dominique's 8-year-old son has just found her unresponsive in bed, surrounded by a pool of blood.
Can you imagine what this is going to be like for him? Just how traumatizing it is.
Take everybody in the house.
Alerted by her grandson, Dominique's mom rushes inside.
Of course, she has no idea what to think.
She's panicking, and she goes to the house to see what's going on.
Dominique! Dominique! Are you...
She comes inside and sees her daughter there with blood everywhere.
Dominique!
She immediately calls the police.
911, what's your emergency?
Something wrong with my daughter, please!
When the officers arrived on the scene, they find Dominique laying in bed, face down.
And spreading around her is a pool of blood.
There was a single gunshot wound to the right side of her head. Is she...
Sorry.
No!
Could be a possible suicide.
Police confirmed that her daughter was in fact dead.
Mother of 4, Dominique Clayton, was settling into an exciting new relationship with Oxford, Mississippi policeman Matthew Kenny.
Their relationship took off really quickly.
You like it for real?
I love it.
They dove pretty deep in the relationship rather quickly. It wasn't long before they got very serious. He's been helping her pay her rent, and he bought her a ring.
But now Dominique and Matthew's promising future has taken a tragic turn.
Her 8-year-old son came home and found his mother laying in her bed unresponsive.
His life would never be the same.
To the officers at the scene, it appears she may have died by her own hand.
Because there was a single gunshot wound to her head, they thought that this might be a suicide. There's no sign of forced entry. Nothing seems to indicate at all that there was any sort of struggle in the home.
But after a closer examination of the bed, police rule out the possibility that Dominique killed herself.
There was no gun.
Everyone knows that without a weapon being nearby, it could not have been suicide.
You go ahead and start me MBI.
Once Oxford police realized Dominique's death was a homicide, they hand the case over to the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation.
Matthew's co-workers, they knew that he was dating her. And so a police officer immediately requested the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation to come in.
Under normal circumstances, the police department would handle this case themselves. But since it was a police officer involved intimately with the deceased, that poses a conflict of interest, and they would need to call an outside investigator.
When the MBI investigators look over the crime scene, they agree with the Oxford police's opinion that the shooting was a homicide.
It even appeared that she was sleeping when she was shot.
She was laying down in her bed and her head was on the pillow, and there was a single spent slug found in the pillow.
The slug appears consistent with a .380 caliber handgun.
A .380, a .38 Special, and a 9mm all fire the same diameter bullet. But a .380 slug is generally lighter in weight.
However, there's no shell casing at the scene.
The shooter probably picked it up. Or it could mean that the murder weapon was a revolver.
But why would someone murder the mother of four? Looking for insight, the investigators turn to Dominique's family.
Several of Dominique's family members had rushed over as soon as they heard the news.
They were completely distraught.
But they are able to shed some light on the hours leading up to her murder.
Do you know what time she got in last night?
It had to be about midnight or so, because I saw her car lights come down the driveway.
Our family mentioned that she decided to go out, have a nice night at the square. As far as they knew, she got home by herself.
But by the next morning, she was dead.
We know that she would have been killed sometime during the night before sunrise. Did you hear any gunshots?
No, I must have slept wrong.
Because her position in the bed, the way she was lying on the pillow, must have muffled the sound.
Okay. Do you know if Dominique had any issues with anyone?
No, not really.
The community loved her, her family loved her. She was nice in the neighborhood, like everybody always remembered seeing her smiling.
The only person the family says Dominique ever had trouble with was her next-door neighbor, Isaiah Hill.
Apparently, Dominique had issues with him, and they didn't seem to get along very well. This neighbor, Isaiah Hill, played loud music, had a lot of people over.
Was really disruptive for Dominique, and especially her children, keeping them up at night.
But that doesn't strike the investigators as a motive for murder.
What about her boyfriend?
Matthew?
Was there any issues between them?
No, he took good care of her.
The family says things seem to be going well.
They seem to be in a steady and stable relationship.
He had bought her a car and a ring.
But there was one problem.
What's that?
Well, Matthew's married.
The Bureau of Investigation agents have learned that their murder victim Dominique Clayton's boyfriend, Matthew Kenny, isn't just a cop. He's also married.
The instant they find out that he's married, that changes things.
According to her family, Dominique was well aware that she was dating a married man.
He did not mislead Dominique. He was having an affair. Dominique did know that Matthew was married, and Dominique's close friends knew, her family knew.
It always bothered me, but he seemed to love her.
A lot of people were saying that she wasn't just like a fling. It was something that had been going on for a long time, and she was anticipating being with this man.
However, there was one complication. Matthew's wife.
I don't believe the wife knew that he was having an affair. They kept it a secret.
Could she have found out about the relationship somehow? Could she be involved?
From the crime scene, The investigators head to the Lafayette County Sheriff's Office to speak with Matthew.
Since Matthew was an Oxford police officer, they conducted the interview at the sheriff's department to avoid a potential conflict of interest.
Thanks for meeting with us.
Absolutely.
We just had a couple questions to ask.
Guys, I totally get it.
He is completely open and transparent. He confirms everything that the family has already told them.
Matthew said he's married, but from his understanding, his wife had no idea that he was having an affair.
And, because of what happened.
You gotta rule me out.
Exactly.
Married man dating a woman that has just come up dead, he would have been a suspect from the jump.
Although Matthew swears he would never do anything to hurt Dominique.
From the moment I met her, there was just something about her that was so alive.
He said they hit it off great and they were in love.
I was just with her a few hours before, so I actually can't believe she's gone.
He's very open and honest about his emotions.
He seemed heartbroken over her loss.
And he says he'll do anything he can to help find Dominique's killer.
Whatever you guys need, anything, I'm here to help, okay?
Okay, well, maybe start by walking us through what all happened last night.
Matthew says that Dominique was out at a bar.
They'd been communicating via text throughout the night.
You didn't meet her there?
No, I was at work.
He said he was at the stables, tending to the mounted patrol horses.
But according to Matthew, Dominique had called him around midnight.
Matthew said that Dominique called him from the bar. It was raining, so she asked Matthew to give her a ride to her car so that she would be able to drive home.
I can come now.
He said he'd driven down to the bar to get her.
Hurry.
Oh my gosh, I got so. He picked her up from the square, took her to her car.
Thank you so much for dropping me off.
Of course. Call me when you get home,
Okay.
Matthew says that after he dropped Dominique off at her car, he'd driven back to the stables.
Hey, babe.
Hey, you make it home okay?
Yeah, I just pulled in.
Okay, good.
He said that he knew she had arrived home because he heard the sound of the door.
You want me to come over when I get off later?
No, not tonight. I'm actually pretty tired.
She wanted to lay down, and so he didn't think much of it.
As far as he knew, she was able to get home and was going on to bed.
You were at the stables the entire time?
Yes, sir. Till about 2:30 a.m.
You didn't go to Dominique's?
No.
He said after he took her to her car, he went back to work. He texted her around 2:30 a.m. and told her good night.
At that point, he left and went home.
His account of the evening appears to check out, too.
He allows the police to go through his phone,
just to make sure everything matched up with what he had told them.
The incoming calls from Dominique, the 2:30 a.m. text message, it was all there.
We'll be in touch if we learn anything new.
Okay.
After talking to Matthew, the investigators head to the home that he shares with his wife, Melissa.
Maybe Matthew's wife wasn't as unsuspecting as he claimed.
They're wondering if she had anything to do with this.
Miss Kenny?
Yes?
I don't know if you've heard, but a woman was killed last night.
I did. Matthew called from the station, said he'd be a while. Is he part of the investigation?
You could say that.
She seems to have no idea about the affair.
They have a life together, a home together. They have kids together.
But she soon learns she wasn't the only woman in Matthew's life.
She is very upset learning this news.
She had no indication at all that Matthew was having an affair.
All those Nazis said he was working late. How could it be so stupid?
It was just an awkward moment for the investigators.
But they still need answers.
Just to make sure, they asked Melissa where was she during the night of the murder.
What, you think I killed her?
I'm sorry, ma'am, but we do need...
No. I understand.
She told the investigators that she had nothing to do with Dominique's death.
And she's able to provide an airtight alibi.
At that point, they had no reason to believe that she was involved with the crime.
They believe it couldn't have been her.
Thank you.
Of course.
Which takes the investigators back to, if not square one, at least back to the square.
Since Dominique had been drinking on the square the night before her death, the investigators wondered if something could have happened while she was out there. Could she have run into someone?
Someone who might have followed her home.
Detectives tracked down the friend she was with that night at the bar.
Her friend does confirm Matthew's story, that Dominique did contact him for a ride home.
When asked if anything unusual happened while they were out that evening, Dominique's friend says no.
She said it was just a chill girls' night of drinking and catching up.
Can you think of anyone who might have a reason to hurt Dominique?
Well, there's this guy, Isaiah.
The neighbor?
Yeah.
Dominique's family had brought up Isaiah earlier, but it didn't seem like much of a lead.
They mentioned that Isaiah would play loud music, he would have parties, always people around. She didn't like that, so they always had words.
And according to her friend, Dominique had done more than just exchange words with him.
She even called the police and got him arrested.
Mississippi Bureau of Investigation agents looking into the murder of Dominique Clayton have learned the mother of four had a long-running beef with a neighbor named Isaiah Hill.
Dominique had issues with him. He was always having loud parties.
It got to the point where it would keep her children up at night due to the noise.
Dominique's family had mentioned the trouble with Isaiah, but the investigators didn't think it sounded like a motive for murder.
Until one of Dominique's friends adds some additional context.
It got so bad, she called Isaiah's landlord and tried to get him to do something.
That didn't get her anywhere.
So she took matters into her own hands.
And after a little digging on the internet, Dominique had found some leverage over Isaiah.
She discovered that Isaiah had some warrants out for his arrest.
He was wanted in DeSoto County, which is about an hour northwest of Oxford.
One quick phone call to the DeSoto County Sheriff's Department, and Dominique figured her troubles with Isaiah were over.
He was in fact incarcerated due to Dominique contacting the authorities.
Or were her troubles only beginning?
When the investigators looked into Isaiah, they learned he had been released from the DeSoto County Jail the day before Dominique's murder.
This may have been some type of retaliation.
When the detectives bring Isaiah in for questioning, he denies having anything to do with Dominique's murder.
Look, I know she called the law on me, but I would never do anything like that.
You sure? We know you got out of jail the day before the murder.
Man, I wasn't even here.
He said that after his release, he had gone to Memphis for his daughter's high school graduation.
I almost missed it.
When did you get back from Memphis?
Not until Sunday. I spent the night at my mama's house.
If that was true, then he couldn't have killed Dominique.
However, an alibi isn't all that Isaiah offers investigators.
Yo, y'all really want to know who did it? Y'all need to ask that cop that's always coming around.
Officer Kenny.
He said, I had heard some things about Matthew. He's a dirty cop.
I'm telling you, he's dirty.
The investigators aren't sure what to make of Isaiah's allegations against Matthew.
Okay. As of right now, you're free to go. But we will be in touch.
Yeah, I bet.
When the detectives follow up with Isaiah's family in Memphis, his alibi checks out.
His mom said he spent the night at her house, and she even had pictures of Isaiah and his daughter at her graduation.
Was it possible Isaiah had been telling the truth about Matthew, too?
The investigators were curious about the comments about Matthew being a dirty cop, so they dug a little bit deeper.
At first, what they uncovered about Matthew wasn't especially troubling.
They find out he had resigned from his previous force in Olive Branch.
But when they reach out to a contact at Matthew's former precinct, they hear his resignation might have been more complicated.
They hear rumors that he didn't just resign, he was asked to.
He allegedly had left the employment with the city of Olive Branch under a cloud of suspicion.
Apparently, there had been some questions about his conduct during an investigation.
But it was the circumstances of the crime that really raised a red flag.
Someone close to him was killed by a gunshot wound to the head.
Eventually, it was ruled a suicide.
Allegedly, at one point, he was a possible suspect.
MBI investigators have just uncovered a possible reason for Dominique Clayton's boyfriend, Matthew Kenny, resigning from his job with another police department.
A woman had died from a gunshot wound to her head.
Initially, there was a suspicious death.
However, the investigators concluded that it was a suicide.
But a contact at the department implied that the detectives investigating that death had considered Matthew a person of interest at some point.
He was never arrested, but there would have been a reason that he was a suspect.
Okay.
Regardless of his innocence, questions surrounding the incident led him to resign.
Matthew moved to Oxford, Mississippi, and took a job there at the police department.
And once settled in Oxford, Matthew had met Melissa.
They got married and had another child together.
So she thought that she was in a happy relationship and she was building something with someone that she could trust and love.
But what Matthew's wife didn't know was that her husband was leading a double life.
3 years after moving to Oxford, Matthew began his affair with Dominique.
She was aware that he was married.
She was under the impression that he was going to leave his wife.
Instead, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation agents are trying to solve her murder. And the details of Dominique's death, a single gunshot wound to the head, are eerily similar to another case Matthew was rumored to be linked to.
Is this just a coincidence?
There seems to be some sort of pattern.
However, despite the rumors, MBI investigators discover that Matthew Kenny was absolved of any connection to the previous suspicious death.
He was totally exonerated.
But now a suspect in Dominique's death, they decide to take a closer look at Matthew's movements the night of the murder.
They subpoena Matthew's phone records.
Maybe he'd followed Dominique home?
The tower data from his cell phone should allow investigators to track his movements.
When the investigators receive the records, they appear to confirm his initial account of the evening.
Matthew's cell phone records showed that he did pick up Dominique and then return to the stables.
He was also at the stables when Dominique called him at 12:30.
And 2 hours later,
He was at the stables around 2:30 in the morning when he sent that goodnight text.
Which appeared to suggest he'd never left the stables.
or at least his phone never left.
They kept digging through the records and eventually spotted something unusual.
There were no records of activity for about an hour and a half.
He didn't contact anyone else, didn't use social media or use the internet.
Although if Matthew did ditch his phone, investigators have a pretty good guess about where he'd gone.
The investigators figured he'd left his phone behind so he could sneak back to Dominique's place.
The question is, could they prove it?
Unable to use his cell phone to track his location, their next move is to use surveillance videos from around the neighborhood to see if Matthew can be placed at the crime scene during that time.
Police don't find anything in that neighborhood, but just a little ways away, they find a convenience store video.
One of the store's cameras covers the intersection just outside Dominique's neighborhood.
They got the footage, and when investigators reviewed the recording from the night of the murder, they got a break.
When they pull the video, they'd see an Oxford police car.
The Oxford Cruiser is crossing the intersection at about 2:05 in the morning.
The footage isn't clear enough to make out the driver or the number on the cruiser, but the investigators suspect it's Matthew behind the wheel.
They immediately contact Oxford police to find out if there is a reason for a cruiser to be in that area at the time.
After checking with dispatch, they find that no officers should have been in that vicinity at that time.
So why was there an Oxford police car on surveillance in that area?
It's more than enough for the investigators to bring Matthew back in for a second interview.
They tell him they've discovered some things.
Look, I'm just gonna get right to it.
You have the right to.
They begin to read him his Miranda rights.
He knows the drill. He waives his right, though, to an attorney.
You don't need that.
He says he's willing to talk.
And this time, he's not holding back.
I just wanted my old life back. Okay, just hold on, okay?
Convinced that Matthew Kenny killed his girlfriend, Dominique Clayton, FBI investigators have brought the Oxford police officer in for a second round of questioning.
This time, it sounded like he was on the verge of confessing.
I just wanted my old life back.
He told the cops he got tired of what he believed to be constant pressure from Dominique to do more and more for her.
I'm not a millionaire.
He said that their relationship became a serious strain on his finances.
And he actually tried to cut things off.
But according to Matthew, all that had done was make things worse.
He tells police Dominique threatened to tell his wife about the affair.
He then decided that the only way to end the affair was to get rid of Dominique.
I didn't know what else to do.
All he needed was an opportunity. One that came early on the morning of May 19th.
You want me to come over when I get off later?
No, not tonight.
He saw the opportunity when she told him she was tired and going to go to bed.
That night was his chance.
He left his cell phone at the stables so it couldn't be tracked, and loaded a .380 round into his service weapon.
He did not use the bullets provided by the city. He changed it out, a different caliber bullet. He thought he knew how best to cover his tracks.
Matthew seemed to be pretty confident, almost overconfident.
He got into a squad car, left, and slipped into Dominique's house and stood over her, watching her while she slept.
He said at first he couldn't bring himself to kill Dominique.
He's just standing over her. He's looking at her. He's torn. He doesn't do anything.
But after a few moments of hesitation, his fear of being exposed as a liar and a cheat won out.
He's like, I have no choice. I have to do this, and I can't think about the consequences. He got wrapped up in his wants and thought this is the only way out. where he could continue on with his life and maybe make right his relationship with his wife.
Whatever his motivation, once Dominique was dead, Matthew had carried on with his plan.
After he shot her, he said he left her house and went back to the stables.
On the way back to work, he throws out his shell casing.
Since the .380 is less powerful than the 9mm, the gun fired, but no casings ejected, which is why none were found at the crime scene.
Then at 2:30 a.m., he'd sent Dominique the goodnight text, knowing she'd never read it.
But he knew that the phone records would show that he sent the text from the stables.
And shortly after that, he went ahead and went home.
He thought he was gonna get away with it.
Instead, his carefully thought out plan had gone all wrong.
Matthew Kinney,
Hold on.
you are under arrest.
Once he confessed, the investigators placed Matthew under arrest for the murder of Dominique Clayton.
But an arrest is a long way from justice. And as the case moves toward trial in the summer of 2020, the stakes have never been higher.
This was the summer that George Floyd had been murdered.
So you had a white married man, a cop in Oxford, who allegedly has killed a young black single woman, mother of 4. And then you had these individuals in Minnesota who heinously killed George Floyd. And so people were just tuned in to all of the different atrocities happening across the country, especially to unarmed black men and women.
There were tensions arising between the black community and police officers.
No one is feeling safe at this time. No one feels like the police are protecting and serving like they should be.
As protests against police brutality spread across the nation, Oxford was no exception.
It was very intense. Tensions were high.
And this was a case in which family members believed that Matthew would not be held accountable.
But as the tumultuous year of 2020 gave way to 2021, it appeared that Matthew may have been feeling the heat.
In July of 2021, he pled guilty to murder.
He was sentenced to life in prison.
The family and the community was elated.
This was justice for Dominique and for all of the other victims who suffered at the hands of the police.
The Oxford community sent a resounding message to Matthew that he was not above the law, even though he did once wear blue.
He got exactly what he deserved.
Some would say justice was served. Others continue to say that that's not enough, that laws need to change. Simply putting an officer behind bars is just not enough to fix the wounds of our past.
And no outcome will ever be enough to make up for what Matthew did to Dominique, her 4 children, and her family.
Dominique's family has endured so much trauma since her death.
The world is not the same without her.
She was a sister, a daughter, a mom. She'll never get to see her children grow up. She deserved it.
I think about those 4 children constantly. I'm hoping that they can rebuild their lives, but no one will ever be able to replace their mother.